Loneliness is an unpleasant emotional response to perceived or actual isolation.
I would maybe assume older adults or adolescents. I think that maybe surprised me.
Where do I hear people talk about feeling lonely? It's a conversation that's not had enough.
It's life, it's not noise. There's so much life in your house, but
Chronic loneliness in terms of poor health outcomes is massive. But just before we started, when we were waiting for you, Huge,
many times.
Hello and welcome back to the Social Matters podcast. We are three social workers talking about social matters. My name is Fran.
Hi, I'm Nadia.
Hi, and I'm Eugene.
Hello, team.
Hello.
How are you both today?
Good. It feels like a while since we've recorded, right? But yeah.
It has been a while. It's the middle of the summer and I'm really sweaty because I was running in here because I was late. I think I have to tell everyone else.
Okay.
Before we throw you under the bus. So lovely to see you both. We're gonna get straight in terms of kind of getting to discuss this topic. And today we're going to be talking about the idea of loneliness. And it's interesting, isn't it, when we're thinking about podcast topics, because I remember when we were discussing it last week, I said, have we done one on loneliness? And actually what we'd done was one on touch, wasn't it, during the pandemic? And I guess it was linked to, social isolation, but we haven't actually done one on loneliness. No. And it very much relates to our work at Social Matters with organisations, because we talk a lot about connection and belonging within the workplace. And I think, loneliness fits within that kind of topic as well, in those kind of related ideas. But just before we started, when we were waiting for you, Huge,
many times.
Nads and I were like, we always think about a definition, and we were kind of like, we're almost starting the podcast, weren't we? But how would you define it, and how does it relate to other related concepts or feelings or emotions? So we thought we would start off with a definition that Nad's found, and then I guess a bit of a launch pad from that.
Can I just say I'm really glad you both have done so much work on this episode before I entered the room.
Okay, that's all right.
Three's a magic number.
That's it. Teamwork. Because when we were talking, I was like, lonely. Because when we first kind of came up with this, I was like, I don't know if I've ever felt lonely, like lonely. And I was thinking there is like an element of like pain attached to loneliness, and I was like, I don't know if I've ever felt lonely. Anyway, so then we looked, I was like, let's have a look at the definition, and this is a definition that we found, is that loneliness is an unpleasant emotional response to perceived or actual isolation. Loneliness is also described as a social pain, a psychological mechanism that motivates individuals to seek social connections. It is often associated with a perceived lack of connection and intimacy. And I think it says perceived in there a couple of times, and I was like, that's quite interesting. Like how your perception of it, whether you narrate it as loneliness or solitude or isolation. Isolation and solitude doesn't seem to have quite the pain attached to loneliness in my mind.
But I think so. I was drawn to that idea of perception because it was making me think that you can still be in a community, in a group, in a relationship, in a family, and still feel lonely. Yeah. So it's not necessarily for me just a physical element. So you're actually in isolation, you're actually on your own. So thinking about, you mentioned lockdown before, think about the lockdown context. I think for me that's one way of being lonely. Like physically you can't have contact with a lot of people, but also in relationships and in communities, because I think people, I'm kind of thinking about people who have been in relationships with a partner or in friendship groups, and they felt that loneliness because of the something that was lacking in the emotional element of the relationship. Yeah.
I mean, that perception element is powerful, isn't it? Because I guess emotions are subjective in terms of how we perceive them. And I don't know, just that someone, a close person said to me once, I remember, and it stuck with me, like, they weren't in a good place and they were like, I just feel lonely in company. And when you just like, as you were saying, just that like, so you could still be, in a group, on a night out, in a social thing, but not feeling that connection. So I think that connection, a meaningful connection, is sort of key. But that psychological motivation to seek it out is also linked with that. And I was telling you two the other day, wasn't I? Just share it with the kind of the listeners of I was it was a bizarre situation. So I'd been on a long run and I stood by this lamppost doing some stretches, and this older man just came up to me and he was like, "Oh, you do those stretches, girl, that's it." Really sweet guy. And we just started chatting, and he just said, "Oh, I used to keep fit and, you know, I used to eat well, but there's no point now. My wife died last year, and since she died, I just don't have anything to live for." And you know, when you just like, and it felt like that, as you said, that like psychological motivation to come and speak to me and have some interaction. And I sort of, you know, that like, I think I just went straight into solutions. I was like, "What, you know, do you have a family?" And he just said, "No, we didn't have children. You know, my parents died many years ago." And I said, "What about community? Are you in anything?" And he was just sort of like, "No." He was in some sort of, I think, like British Legion type club. But then he said after his wife died, one person sent him a card and then he heard nothing. And I just had this interaction with this man for like 10 minutes. And then my bus came and off he went. And that felt felt loneliness. It had like been the compulsion for him to come and speak to me, but just that isolation, that lack of connection with people, and just seeing him walk off, that is still kind of with me now. And that was a couple of weeks ago of just, that sadness. I suppose it is linked to sort of sadness, lack of connection, community. But that really was like, I think that is loneliness.
There's something connected to that in terms of like the relationship loss, maybe of a relationship, of a loved one, and the sadness of it, and there's still this like the loneliness bit. It kind of all bleeds into all of it, isn't it? The sadness, the isolation, the loneliness. Oh God, it's all a bit
Monday
heavy,
morning,
isn't it?
But Monday morning, but also when I'm listening to you speak and just feeling your reaction there, Nads, I feel like this is a conversation that's not really had, because I think it's a middle ground between, because I think we have conversations about mental health and the challenges on people's mental health, and I think that conversation is gathering pace with regards to how mental a lack of concentration or focus on the well-being and mental well-being of people can lead to, like, in the worst case scenarios, people taking their life and things like that. But there's this middle ground between joy and really significant and impactful poor mental health around like loneliness and sadness and people not feeling that sense of belonging. And we talk a lot about that in our work. And just even when you said those words, sadness, I'm like, when do I hear people talk about sadness and people feeling sad? Or where do I hear people talk about feeling lonely? It's a conversation that's not had enough. And I think because it's not had enough, people maybe don't feel comfortable with talking about it, maybe with peers, and saying, like, I feel lonely. Because you mentioned this guy who was an older guy, but I wonder, people around our age, younger people, the effects of this is me with no knowledge of sounding like an old man, but the effects of social media on people is like, people look at their social media, they get this perception of everyone is doing all of this stuff, and then they're like, okay, my life is not like that, and then it kind of causes them to feel lonely in a way.
It's interesting, the research around loneliness says, in terms of kind of demographics in the UK and I suppose Western societies, that it's adolescents and then older adults where it kind of manifests the most. And it's interesting, I suppose, maybe reflecting on that, I would maybe assume older adults, because again, maybe experiencing loss of a partner, or maybe your social, systems become smaller. But adolescents, I think that maybe surprised me initially, of kind of thinking that's a time where you are kind of seeking social connection. But then when I thought about it a bit deeper, I thought actually that does also make sense, because because you are seeking it, and if you don't get it, but you're not kind of out there as much as an autonomous being in like middle adulthood. Because I do think in my kind of 30s and 40s, you know, you feel much more autonomous, and maybe this is me as well, like Franny extracurricular, but like I just, you know, you have more like, oh, I'm going to try this thing and join this club and do this thing. And I know that's not everybody. I guess that's just reflecting on my own kind of journey with, you know, community. I definitely, I feel like more able and social to just do a thing, join a thing, which made me think about that. But yeah, it's interesting, both those sort of time periods where it's highest.
That is interesting. It reminds me of a kind of a story. I can't remember where I heard it, whether it was in conversation or on a podcast or something I was listening to. But there was a guy who was, he's got 4 kids. It was a podcast, I remember. He's got 4 kids, and he was so like, you know, the life pace is relentless. It's so relentless. Like the house is always noisy. Like I'm trying to work and the kids are doing this, and you know, there's so much noise. There's so much noise all the time. And then his dad came over, and his dad came and was just sat in the house, and he was just sat in the noise and enjoying it. And then he was like, "Oh, son, like there's so much life in your house," and he was like, oh, it's life, you know, it's not noise, like there's so much life in your house. And that's something that the dad didn't have because he was living by himself. And I just think it just reminds me of, when you're older, it's so much more. It's, for me, I kind of think about maybe I'll experience that when I'm older. It's not necessarily something I've experienced. I'm finding it really difficult to think of a time when I felt lonely, and that's something that worries me. Like when I'm older, like, am I gonna just be lonely? I think about that a lot. But that, I suppose, I took the message to take from that is perception. You know, how you perceive your life or how you perceive your situation, impacts.
And also it's like, where you are in your life and what you were saying around where you are in your 30s, because when I was listening to both of you speak, I have felt another time when I felt lonely, and it was in my adolescence. And as you know, I can't remember if I said it on the podcast before, I say it to anyone who wants to listen, but I used to be really shy when I was younger, up until like my 20s. And when I was like 16, 17, it was almost like trying to find where I fit in, where I fit in society and identity. So it meant that not consciously, but I moved away from a group of friends and tried to move towards a group of new people to try and find my identity. But because of my shyness, I didn't quite make that journey. So I was stuck in between. So although I had people and had friends to an extent, I still felt lonely. I don't think I was anyone's like close group and close network. And then fast forward to lockdown, where I was in my 30s and I live on my own, and everyone knows what lockdown was like. I didn't feel lonely because I felt like, going back to what you're saying, in your 30s, and when you have autonomy, you have a better sense of self. It's like it doesn't matter about being alone for me in that context.
I was thinking about what is it that because it said in that definition something about like it being a motivator for you to connect with others, but it was making me think, is there something about like almost like the relationship that you have with self as well, like that contributes to the perception or perceived feeling of loneliness? If you there's something amiss or remiss, or I don't know what the word is, but something about sitting with yourself and the relationship you have with yourself to then be able to feel connected to others. Is that an impact, or does that influence loneliness somehow?
I think so. Again, back to that point of kind of maturation. I think in my 30s and 40s now, I'm like, I'm cool with like doing whatever. And I think maybe in adolescence you look more out to seek your validation. And I'm not saying that completely stops, but it's similar to you, like actually living on my own in lockdown, and that like actually peace and solitude and being like really okay in my own space and skin, whereas in adolescence it's perhaps a more time of insecurity and searching. But I was thinking about the influence of culture on kind of loneliness, and I guess kind of different cultures of like individualism and then community and collectivism. And I think you know, I guess historically, I suppose I was thinking of like Margaret Thatcher's kind of individualism, but it predates that, I think, in like Western society of like Enlightenment moving much more to like the individual and actually more collective communities, and thinking about where I live. So you two know well. So I've got two older Caribbean men like flanking me in my flat. I've got one on each side, and that really feels like community collectivists. They are out there day and night. Hi, and when I go out, they're like my older uncles. Are you out again? And when I come in, they're there and talking. And they knock on all the bloody time. No, and they knock on, and it's interesting because I've had my kitchen done recently. And they're all invested in my kitchen to the point that they come and knock on. Can I come and see it? They're in my flat. I have to be like, get out of my flat. Like they are in my grill all day, every day. Last night knocked on, oh, I'm just getting rid of the spiders. Close your window. Oh, can I come in? Like, you know, knock, here's a mango. And like, but actually that is a real sense of community and togetherness. Like we are all one row on my floor, and actually there is much more from, in some spaces, that like close your door, don't talk to me. So yeah, I'm just thinking of that, of kind of loneliness at its extreme, thinking kind of, would anybody know if something happened to me inside my flat? And actually, yes, my neighbours would. And I actually heard one of my neighbours say to my other neighbour, he knocked on and said, I hadn't seen you today. Are you okay? So there's something about, I think maybe culturally, in different kind of cultures, much more for the community and togetherness.
It would be so interesting to do some like deeper reading about whether loneliness or is it as much of a thing in other cultures outside of like Western culture. It'd be really, really interesting, because, you know, thinking about like how other cultures kind of include and revere and think about older people within their cultures, and that's, I suppose, one end of the spectrum in terms of age. But yeah, it would be interesting to think about that.
Absolutely. And I think we would probably see, again, this is just a hypothesis, like a lot less, because I think with that comes connection, and even often our healing and therapy is done on an individual basis. Western white psychiatry is one-to-one, whereas actually a lot of communities, it's kind of group therapy, group healing, like togetherness. So yeah, maybe people do feel lonely, but I don't know, even the kind of the healing and connection is very much done in group, whereas I think sometimes it's not just individualism, but then individual responsibility for your loneliness and your healing.
And I wonder, again, the hypothesis I have is that I wonder whether it will be a bit of both in other cultures, because I think you've got how other cultures have operated historically, but a lot of cultures and societies in different parts of the world are still pushing for almost like this kind of influenced by capitalism, this desire to get more and more and more with regards to status and economical wealth and stuff like that. So I think once people go into that field, for example, then how much does that become their kind of primary goal, and then can link to loneliness, like that idea of it's lonely at the top, for example. But also I was thinking, when you mentioned other cultures, around whether it's more prevalent in other cultures when significant loss happens, or significant loss of a person or partner, or a significant relationship and family members. And no matter how much you have a community around you, if you lose the guy you mentioned who was speaking when you were stretching, if you lose your loved one, and that was the person that made you feel a part of something, I wonder how it doesn't really matter how much the community comes around you. It's got to be both, and I still feel the community's here for me, but I have a hole. That's
the pain.
But is that sadness? Like, is it loneliness?
I think it'll be dependent on the individual. I think you can feel sad about it, but you can also feel lonely, because the sort of conversations and connections and the felt sense that you have I would imagine from a partner you've been with for 50 years, I don't know whether that can ever be replace her. You'll have somebody knocking on your door and saying, "Oh yeah, do you want to come and do something together?" But like, actually, I still feel lonely. Could
Yeah.
possibly.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because like we're saying, it is down to like self-perception, and you kind of saying your experience of loneliness. But I wonder, it's interesting, isn't it? Thinking about like, is being able to say I felt lonely, does it feel like what I wonder if it feels different to saying I'm sad. Like, what is it that, you know, because it is perception. We're thinking, oh, I've not necessarily felt that, and I wonder, thinking like reflexively, is it because it feels like a slight on other people? Because if you have friends and family and people that are there for you, and you're saying to them, I feel lonely, is it like, oh, cheers, mate, thank you? No. But you know, I don't know. It's interesting, isn't it? It was just going around my head, and we were talking about like, what is it that maybe stops one from identifying it as lonely? Maybe because they don't feel that, but there's something very relational about loneliness.
Yeah, and maybe when you were saying that in terms of it being a slight on those around you, I was thinking of it more as like, is it a shameful thing? Yeah. Is it a shameful thing to be like, I'm lonely? Does it I don't know, does it comment on, like, is it a comment on you in some way that if you know, accept loneliness, or not accept loneliness, but, you know, call yourself lonely?
Because I feel, I wonder yes to both kind of comments, because again, in wider society, where have we seen imageries or conversations or like people feeling lonely or talking about it in a quite an open way? Because I think a lot of people are currently feeling it, would have felt it. I think especially in the kind of age bracket that we're in, I think a lot of people, society tells you should be married, you should have kids, you should have this and that, and people in that situation who don't have some of that or any of that, and they have all of their friends who are in relationships and with partners and having children, and if that's their kind of narrative of this is where I should be, and every time I get into contact with one of my friends, I see their joy and see their love and see what they've created, then you go back home and you do feel that loneliness. So, and I think it is that people are like, oh, I don't want to kind of voice that because I will feel shame, and I think it comes back down to stories and narratives. I don't think there's enough conversations, open conversations, and conversations that we accept that about people feeling or experiencing loneliness.
I agree completely, because I was just thinking about it more than other emotions. I do think culturally, societally, we are getting better at talking about emotions, particularly Gen Zs. I think there is more emotional literacy to say I feel sad, I feel depressed, but there's something about the punch of if someone says I feel lonely, you hear that a lot less. I definitely have heard people say I feel sad or I feel depressed. If I feel lonely, it does, there's something, and maybe that's my perception as well, but it feels like
despairing.
Yeah.
What do you think helps with loneliness? How do you think, you know, one moves through it?
I guess a couple of things come to mind. I think one, I was saying at the beginning, it's around connection, but it's about that meaningful connection, because often, you know, with COVID and then post-COVID, a lot of people are working from home, they're working online, and we'll have that, you know, you can feel like, oh, I'm talking to people all day, but actually not feel that meaningful connection. And same with like advancements in technology, like, you know, I know I sound like a real elder now, but, you know, like there's no cashiers, you know, I mean, you could go to the shop and not speak to anybody. AI, you know, really, you know, brilliant in many ways, still a lot of research on it, a lot of critiques of it. But, you know, like, you don't need to speak to people with technology. So there's those wonderful advancements and all that it gives us, but it's that, like, it doesn't take away from that meaningful connection. But I guess there's a subjectivity, because again, we've said people can feel lonely in company, but it's about having those relationships, and back to your reflection of loneliness of, kind of maybe being between two different friendship groups, but having people who you can really connect with, a real kind of how are you is kind of one of the kind of really important ways, I think.
And I think it's it's a hard question to answer, because on one hand I'm like, people should feel that emotion and that feeling and go through it. and so I think there shouldn't be an urge to have that quick fix. Oh, I feel lonely. Okay, now today I need to go and do this or that.
Yeah.
I think it's almost a journey, and we say a lot, trust the process of it. But I think it's about reflecting for yourself on what your desires and what your wants are. I think sometimes, and it may not be the case with everybody, but going back in your mind to a time when you didn't feel lonely, and instead of connecting with the physical elements of what made you not feel lonely there, connect with the emotional elements, and then try to find that in different places. So you may have felt joy in the past because you had a good friendship group, but how can you get joy from a sports group or doing activities or going on a mental health retreat or a retreat or something like that? But it's a real hard question to answer. I think there's some practical elements you can do. There's some reflection and reflexivity that you can do, and there's some kind of sitting with it and trusting the process that you can do as well.
I was thinking about, I was thinking sort of when I posed that question, like thinking reflexively of like, I suppose my instinct was like, okay, we've got to move out of it. Like, how do you get out of it? Let's get out of loneliness. And, you know, that what you were saying just then about sometimes you just got to sit in it. Like, and maybe you don't want to get out of it at that point or at that stage. But yeah, I was just thinking about things that actually loneliness can be like it can, I was going to say it can be like a temporary time. It can be a temporary thing. Or maybe for some it might feel like it might be perceived to be there is no, especially if you've lost somebody close to you, like it's not going to be temporary. You're just gonna be lonely. You're gonna kind of fit, you know, have that sort of that hole, I guess, that's never really going to be quite filled in the same way. So yeah, I suppose just a bit of a reflection of, should I try and move through it? And if you don't want to feel the loneliness, what are the things that you can do to move through it and kind of push yourself, take some risks, maybe try and do something that's a bit out of your comfort zone or, whatever it is, but maybe it is okay to sit in it as well. And there is always something that you can take, even if it feels uncomfortable or just icky. There is a learning that comes. There is something that can come from uncomfortable situations, I suppose.
Yeah. And I guess that's where like your growth happened in terms of you kind of finding yourself more. But it's difficult, isn't it? Because I guess perhaps that relates to more temporary loneliness, but chronic loneliness in terms of poor health outcomes is massive. There's loads of research linked to substance misuse, obesity, poor health outcomes. Like, so it's hard, isn't it? I guess when something is more temporary to be sat with, and then actually when it massively impacts your life outcomes. And that's there's lots of, and it's hard, as you said, like not to move too much into solution, but that's where social prescribing and things come from around kind of, supporting membership to things, or they have like, conversation cafes and stuff coming up because it's recognised it is an endemic in this society of like people feeling lonely. So I guess there are lots of initiatives out there, particularly through older adults, age concern, like to try to build community that has been lost for a lot of people. So yeah, it's kind of a bit both and, isn't it? I think like not trying to go too much to the solution and sitting with it versus recognising the impact can be significant when it becomes long-term and chronic.
Also, context I think is important because like just as you're speaking, and we're talking a lot about people who live in a society where they have means to go and find a club or take up a new activity, but I think economics come into it. I really think about this guy that I always see in the morning, and I actually never saw him today, but see him in the morning at my local tube station, and I believe he's street homeless, and I'm thinking about what does loneliness look like for you, and every day I just see him, he's walking the same route, he's on his own, he doesn't talk to anyone and no one talks to him. Like, what does long-term loneliness look like for him? So I think it's a really, really big conversation, one to continue at different points, and context is a real important thing, I think. In that.
Thank you, team. Really kind of, important and powerful conversation starter as always. And just, so many kind of things whirring, and hopefully just, food for thought for people as well of kind of, loneliness. So thank you. We have been 3 social workers having a conversation today about loneliness. You can follow us on Instagram at Matters Podcast and on LinkedIn, Social Matters. You can check out our website, www.socialmatters.org.uk. We'd love to hear your thoughts and reflections on this episode. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.